Hi everyone. Today's video is about Federalist 51. You know I'm serious today because I've shaved, I got a collared shirt on, the AP test is getting closer, so you need to make sure you're paying attention. I want to make sure everyone understands Federalist 51. So make sure you also read the entire document. This is just kind of a summary explanation of the key points. We also have some guest stars, so pay attention. So James Madison in Federalist 51, he starts off with a really famous quote, the most famous quote from this document. And the quote is, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. So if men were angels, no government would be necessary. So I thought, this is an obvious point. We need government. Anarchy is not going to work. But just to highlight this, I got my kids here with me. With my kids, my 8 and 11-year-old, if there was no government for them, meaning no parents, no rules, we might have some problems. So they're good kids, but they're definitely not angels. So let's bring in example number one.
Oh, hey Dad, what's up?
Hi Carson, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good.
Hey, it's about midnight. You should be going to bed, right? What do you have planned?
Going to bed. I'll be pulling an all-nighter, eating all of the candy in my Easter basket, and playing some video games on my Nintendo Switch.
So you're gonna stay up all night playing video games and eating candy?
Well, yeah. I mean, what's better than that?
Doesn't sound like a great decision, but hey, you have no rules, so you do what you want, right?
See you, Dad.
All right. Let's bring in example number two. If men were angels, no government would be necessary. Hey, Connor.
Hey.
What are you up to? It's about midnight. What's going on?
Oh, I'm just going to be racing with these scissors, and eating this whole entire box of ice cream sandwiches, and playing with this cool toy that when I press a button, fire comes out of it.
So, eating a box of ice cream, running with scissors, and playing with a lighter. That doesn't sound like such a great decision. But hey, no rules, so you know what? Do what you want, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as you can see there, you need government. You need some rules, right? You need some structure because men aren't angels, kids aren't angels. So obviously we need some rules. Those weren't the best decisions they made. They need some rules. They need some structure. The second part to that quote is, if angels were to govern, then you wouldn't need control. So I think we can all agree that government, not angels. The people in government are not angels. So we need some checks. We need some kind of a check on what people in government are doing. So that's what Madison's talking about here, and that's what most of Federalist 51 here is about. So to highlight the reason why you need to have checks, I brought another special guest, my wife today, Brittany. She was going to come in and be a check on my government power in case I would make a bad parenting decision. So let's start with parenting decision number one for me. Hey, come on in here.
The Easter basket is in my stomach, and
you know what?
I'm almost done.
You say that all the time.
No,
I had it.
no.
I'm going to smash this thing.
That's not a good choice, honey. It's a little harsh.
Might have been a little harsh if I crushed his switch, right? So you see a check and balance. I know you probably think I'm perfect and an angel, but I'm not. I can make some mistakes. My wife there was my check and balance there, okay? Second example. Come on in here. I need both kids for this. Hey, boys.
Yeah.
I got a great idea tonight. How about we go out and watch binge the entire series of Tiger King while we eat candy and ice cream all night?
Whoa!
Okay? There's nothing bad in it at all. No bad words, I'm sure. No bad content. Nothing that you shouldn't see, right? Let's do it.
A Lion King sequel?
Yes, we'll go with that.
Sounds so great. Let's go.
Honey. Now, they don't need to be seeing that. That's not appropriate for children their age. They don't need to know who killed Carol Baskin's husband.
She totally
did. That's probably a good decision. So, as you can see, government's not angels. The men aren't angels. You need a government, but you also need checks on that government. And Madison in Federalist 51 is arguing that this new Constitution creates a government that has checks and balances and a number of other things that will make sure things are going in the right direction. So, here are some things that Madison argues. What we just looked at. The Constitution will create a government that will be strong enough to protect liberty and justice. But people need government, but that government also needs to be checked. So you got to have checks on what the government's doing. And remember, the Federalist Papers in general are arguing for ratification of the Constitution. That's the whole point of the Federalist Papers. So Madison's saying right now, he's saying that this new Constitution is going to create a government that will be strong enough to protect liberty and justice. Okay, so in this document, in Federalist 51, he talks about separation of powers, that there are 3 branches of government, checks and balances, and the fact we have a system of federalism. So let's start with what Madison says here about separation of powers and checks and balances. So the first thing he talks about is we have 3 branches of government, and they all need to be independent of each other. They need to be separate, have their own powers, so then they can kind of watch the other branches. So we have 3 branches of government. First branch of government, this should be obvious government stuff, but first branch of government we'll talk about is the executive branch. Okay? Here's the executive branch right there, okay? Executive branch. You notice he came in separately, not with the other branches, because these branches need to be independent, okay? All right. Next branch of government we have is the legislative branch, which Madison's going to say is the most powerful. That's why I, of course, picked my wife to be the legislative branch. Okay, legislative branch also came in separately. There we go. All right. And the third one is the judicial branch. So the judicial branch also independent. And Madison does argue that there needs to be, certainly with the independence with the judicial branch, but you have 3 separate branches of government, independent of each other, but also able to watch the other branches of government. So there's checks and balances. So separation of powers is the separate branches. And then we're going to talk here in a second about the checks and balances. All right. Thank you to my guest stars. Okay. So one thing he says here with the legislative branch, I referenced it was the most powerful. Madison says the legislative branch is the most powerful. And he also talks about how there's even a check within the check. So we have the separation of powers. The legislative branch has certain checks on the executive branch, like the ability to override vetoes and Senate approving treaties and all these things that we've talked about in class. But there's a House and a Senate, and that in itself is a check. The House has, you know how a bill becomes a law, the House has to approve the legislation from the Senate and vice versa. So there's a check even within the branches of government in there. The other thing Madison talks about in Federalist 51 is he talks about federalism. He mentions the fact that states have certain powers and the federal government has certain powers. And that power is divided. So that in itself, states and federal government, there's a check that goes on there as well. And that division will also help to protect your liberty and rights. Right now with the coronavirus, there's a lot going on. And I think you could see this fight right now between the federal government and the states. And there's a lot to discuss. If we were in class right now, we would be talking about this a ton. But I think it's interesting to think about the message in Federalist 51 and was Madison right when it comes to federalism in the Constitution. So I think you can think about the coronavirus, and there's been things said by the president and governors and all of that. And then Madison mentions once again the topic of factions. We talked in Federalist 10. Federalist 10 argues, in Federalist 10, Madison argues that this new Constitution will create a stronger government that will help protect your liberties against the harmful effects of factions. So he continues this argument in Federalist 51 saying, look, with the separation of powers, with the checks and balances, with the federalism, with the idea that we have this large republic, it will all protect your liberties against the harmful effects of factions, and ultimately it will protect minority rights. So to wrap it up, Federalist 51, the big thing here is the separation of powers and checks and balances that are in this new Constitution that will protect your liberties. And ultimately, the ultimate goal is to achieve justice. So that's what Madison says. It's an important message. And again, it's one of those Federalist papers that argues the Constitution needs to be ratified. Thanks for watching. Thanks to my special guest. And we will see you next time. Special guest coming into wave. There we go. Bye-bye.